Thank you so much for coming out here on the opening night of the North to Shore Festival in Asbury Park. My name is Tom, and on behalf of the Asbury Park Historical Society, I welcome you to the Stephen Crane House, a state and national historic site. And actually, if our plans go through for later this year, it'll be an official Library of Congress literary landmark in Asbury Park. Can you believe that? And just like Asbury Park as a whole, this house is a rescue story in and of itself, and we're very proud of that. The place was gutted and boarded up and abandoned by the 1990s until the Hayes family came along in 1995 and found out about its association with Stephen Crane, the novelist and poet and journalist who lived here as a teenager starting in 1883. And while living here, he made his first attempts at stories and poems. His first professional writing experience was as a cub reporter for his brother Jonathan Jr. He covered the boardwalk scene on foot, on bicycle, and on his pony named Pudgy. A lot of P's for the microphone there, sorry. But you see, he was hardly the first of the Cranes to get published. His school teacher sister Agnes, his mother Helen, they both had a lot of stories published and poems and newspapers and such, so he came from a writing household. And as for Helen, in addition to being the president of the local Women's Christian Temperance Union, she had a creative and playful side. She wrote humorous short stories, she painted, she sketched, she sculpted, and she even started, if you can believe this, the first art school in Asbury Park, right here in this house, with another one of her daughters, Nellie. So you see, this was a house of ideas, a house of art, a house of the written word. And we are very pleased to help kick off this very action-packed extended weekend here in town with a unique offering on the festival schedule. This is a salute to the importance of the written and spoken word in Asbury Park's cultural history. The storytellers, the sermonizers and songsmiths, the social crusaders, the scribes who chronicled life in this extraordinary town. And since we're all gathered together under this roof, we're going to start things off with a tribute to Mrs. Crane herself. And we're going to start it off with a person who herself has a very special connection to Mrs. Crane's house. She lived here as a tenant in the 1990s and assisted the Hayes family in getting this place in shape as a public place, public museum and venue. We know her as an activist, an educator, a journalist, whose most recent project is the new website, Asbury Park Reporter. So let me introduce to you Curry Margaret Butch.
Hi, I'm Carrie Margaret Butch, and tonight at the Crane House I played Mary Helen Peck Crane. I gave her voice. She was the leader of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and I also read a couple things that I've written during my career. So what I have in common with Mary Helen Peck Crane was that she ran the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was the forerunner to the League of Women Voters of New Jersey, or League of Women Voters, period. And I ran the League of Women Voters of New Jersey for part of my career. Right now, I'm in Asbury Park. I've been in Asbury Park for close to 30 years. Lived in the Crane House, helped renovate the second floor with Eric Wallace, who did a great job, as well as a ton of other community people. When Tom Hayes owned the building and when he saved it from the wrecking ball. I'm so happy I'm going first. I don't have to go after these amazing people that I'm going to be speaking with tonight. So let's talk a little bit about Helen Peck Crane, and then I'm going to time it. I'm going to time what we do for her, and I'll time what we do for me. I'll do 5 minutes on each because I want you guys to get a sense of who we are, both Helen and I, but not take anything away from the rest of the program. So I want to keep it moving. Everybody knows that the Women's Christian Temperance Union was the precursor to the League of Women Voters. So that's where women went out and organized against alcohol. So they created essentially prohibition. Their organizing skills lent to created the infrastructure to then turn around and enable us to organize to get the vote. So the relationship that I have with Helen is, I was the executive director of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey. She was the lead of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So I have to say that I feel her spirit. I felt her spirit when I lived here. It took Eric and I about 8 months to do the second floor. So we not only did we act as a tenant, we actually renovated the second floor with help from 1 million people here, right, in Asbury Park. Like Werner came and helped us taught us how to do the plastering and all sorts of stuff. I'm going to go on to Helen now. I just wanted to share that story with you guys because I feel her presence. And I drop everything. Maybe she doesn't want me to read that particular passage. All right, so here's one of the things she did. These are from the minutes of the 10th Annual Convention on the Women's Christian Union of New Jersey at Hackettstown, October 3rd through 5th, 1883. Now I'm going to time this so I don't go crazy here. I don't go overboard. She would want us to do that. She would want us to keep on time. Okay, how to conduct a weekly meeting of the Women's Christians Temperance Union. This question resolves itself into 2 factors. First, a meeting to be led. Second, the leadership of said meeting. First, we would premise that the Women's Christian Temperance Union has been organized in accordance with the state and county constitutions. Second, that arrangements are made for a regular business meeting with a well-digested order of business. Third, that a suitable place has been secured, easy of access, as central as possible, and one in which all the decorations and appointments are in accord with our work on the gospel line. Fourth, that there is in attendance, it may be small, but bear in mind that the 2 or 3 gathered together in Christ's name are enough to call down the blessing. So here we go. The second factor of this question, how to conduct, implies leadership. As a rule, it's better for the president of the union to lead the meeting herself, or if she appoints a substitute, to keep an oversight, so as to have controlling power. Leadership in God's work is by divine appointment. When great work is to be done, great reforms to be instituted, the church led up to higher ideals. God calls to the fore some man or some woman who has been in training, all unknown to themselves for their great mission. Witness Moses, educated in all the learning of the Egyptians as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter, to be a great lawgiver of the ages. David, feeling his father's sheep, communing with the great mysteries of nature, becomes the sweet singer of Israel. Saul of Tarsus, taught by Gamaliel, becomes the astute logician who convinces kings and princes, yet yields up all things that he may carry salvation to the Gentiles. Luther, the humble worker, proclaiming to all Europe, at a time of universal darkness and superstition, the simple truth of justification by faith. Washington was raised up to lead the armies of the Republic to victory, and the people to liberty. Lincoln, the plain, homely, yet homelike man, becomes the beautiful evangel of liberty to millions of people under the bonds. Our own Mrs. Wittenmeyer and Miss Willard come up to leadership of this great reform through the baptism of suffering. But shrinking, timid women that you are ready to exclaim, "These are those whose shoes I am not worthy to unloose." Look upon the call of duty and the call of God, and rest assured that whomsoever he calls will fit for the work. Recognizing this fact, aim to prepare yourself in accordance with your best ability. First, in your closet, seek that preparation of heart which will come to you from close communion with our Heavenly Father. Second, study to show yourself a workman that needeth not to be ashamed. Do not be satisfied to go before a meeting only prepared to generalize, but fix some things thought in your mind. Pray over it, read about it, think about it, until you're thoroughly imbued with it. Then, will you be ready to give up the keynote at the meeting? Then you will be ready to give the keynote at the meeting. This much is settled. Do not think any of the smallest details unworthy of your attention. Be careful to have your personal appearance be such as it will be above criticism. You may not be able to dress handsomely, but you can at all times secure neatness of attire. A gesture made with soiled a handkerchief in the hand, an untidy collar, a glaring display of color, a general dowdiness of dress will make a first impression on some minds that years of close acquaintances will never efface. Life is made of little things, and the woman who would present herself to lead a meeting, okay, here we go, with untidy gloves upon her hands, with her dress looped up with pins or the buttons off her shoes, will prove to herself to be wanting the small, sweet courtesies of life, which so sweeten the bitter thoughts we have all to drink, and which are so essential to this work of ours. That's Mary Helen Crane Pike. Mary Helen Peck Crane. Actually, I need your help. I have never fancied myself a journalist, but thank you to Tom for telling me that. I did write a column for the ANCHEC Report, which is the Association for New Jersey Environmental Commissions, when I worked there as the Urban Project Director. So Tom inspired me to go look at my writings, and I have some that are housed in the Rutgers Library from that amazing organization. But right now, I want you to tell me if you want to hear about Newark, Asbury Park, or Paulsboro, New Jersey.
Where's that?
Asbury Park, okay. I will read an article that I wrote about eminent domain in Asbury Park, which I was actually considered an activist in. Okay, displaced, this is called, oh, let me put this on here. Eminent domain in New Jersey of house and home. Displaced by the military occupation of Greece, 91-year-old Angie Hampelos and her husband gained freedom when they came to Asbury Park in 1951. Within a few years, they purchased a two-family beachfront bungalow with lilies and roses blooming every year. Angie's husband passed away several years ago. I worked all my life for this little piece of property. Now they say they want to take my whole block to make condominiums. I don't think anyone should push me from my house. If they ask me, I'll say no. Where am I going to go? The street? I love this house. I want to die here. And while Miss Hampelos transplants her favorite flowers into the little plastic pots throughout Asbury Park, New Jersey and the entire country, municipal leaders, redevelopment experts, and community groups grapple with the intricacies of eminent domain reform. In the years since the landmark Supreme Court decision, Kelo versus New London, participants from all sides of private and public life are debating the pros and cons of using eminent domain. Can eminent domain stave off runaway growth and bring back vitality to urban areas? Or will it continue to displace entire neighborhoods and fail to give adequate compensation to homeowners for the loss of their property? Located in the redevelopment zone, Angie's house, as well as 21 other single-family homes, 453 occupied apartment units, 193 rooming house units, 18 business operations are subject to eminent domain proceedings on the 56 acres of Asbury Park waterfront area. If good faith negotiations break down between the master developer and the private owner. With a redevelopment appraisal of less than 1/3 of the price of the new private studio apartment for which her home is being demolished, Ms. Hampelos' family is concerned about the stress that losing her home is putting on her health and is resentful that she can't live out her life in the house she paid for and paid taxes for in peace. Rich DePietro, a small-scale developer who renovated the historic Brickwood apartments in Asbury Park, was dumbfounded when the city refused to include the adjacent Jersey apartments in the redevelopment plan and instead designated his building as the planned parking lot site for new luxury condominiums. The use of eminent domain was once a mechanism to create public projects for the common good. It now fills the trough for the politically connected developers, remarked DePietro. Others in the redevelopment zone also face the losses of not being able to redevelop their own properties and effective destructions of their businesses due to required relocations. Unfortunately, similar stories are occurring throughout the country, having designated one or more areas in need of redevelopment. 115 New Jersey municipalities have authorized the use of eminent domain. In Asbury Park's 1.5 square mile area, there are 7 redevelopment zones. Kilo versus New London. Addressing a redevelopment case filed by homeowner Suzette Kilo against New London, Connecticut, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a landmark eminent domain decision in June 2005. The decision rules that 15 New London waterfront homes could be condemned for economic development. Kilo had sought to prevent her well-maintained home from being taken for large-scale private development. That includes restaurants and office buildings. The mere possibility that a different private development could produce more taxes and jobs is a good enough reason for condemnation, according to the court, writes Dana Berliner, senior attorney for the Kilo case. She lost that case. But it's interesting. I'm going to stop now. That's not the end of the article. That's not the end of the story. This was written in 2005. Joe Mariziti was almost the orchestrator of redevelopment. He's now our city attorney for redevelopment. I can tell you that what happened as a result of this was that in 2009, there was another case called Galenthan v. Paulsboro, which basically redefined blight and said you can't take it just because it's old and rickety. You can only take it if it's dangerous. And it also said you had to educate people on what you were doing when you sent those letters out saying you're in an area in need of redevelopment. I'm going to stop here. You can talk to me about anything, and I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Thank you.
You know, I mentioned that Kerry had lived here for a while, back in the 1990s, and I actually live here now with my wife, and tonight actually marks 12 years since we moved in here. And being here in this house, this very strange and wonderful house, inspired me to take a deep dive into the forever fascinating history of Asbury Park, a town that just makes an impression upon you, whether you've lived there all your life or even not at all. I had the audacity, actually, to write a book about Asbury Park history after just 3 years living here. And in the process of writing it, learned so much about this place and its people. And one of the people in particular that I learned about was a fellow by the name of Reverend James Francis Robinson, a really compelling figure from the late 19th century. And let's just say a thorn in the side of founder James Bradley, and in a very good way. So my take is that there's a perfect spot across the way from founder Bradley's statue, which sometimes has engendered some controversy by its very presence, but a perfect spot for, say, a statue of Reverend Robinson. So the Reverend has some very important things to say to us across a sea of time, and here to channel his words is Reverend Kerwin Webb.
Peace and blessings, everybody. My name is Reverend Kerwin Webb, and I'm serving with Martin Luther King Jr. Presbyterian Church in Neptune. Tonight, I'm reading some excerpts from the published works of Reverend James Robinson, who was one of the vocal opponents of Bradley's segregation policies on Asbury Park's beach. He was a fierce and inspirational speaker, and I will hope to channel and embody his words and his work. After I read some of his works, I will read selected portions of an article that were published in Shared Justice that I wrote back in 2020 in the midst of the death of Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick, Georgia. And so after these, I invite you to join us at the Martin Luther King Jr. Presbyterian Church Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. We would love to worship with you. We would love to see you join us and continue the work that Reverend Robinson started back in the 1800s.
Greetings and good evening. So I will be reading some of Reverend Robinson's words, and in the bulletin, in the program, it kind of gives you an idea of who he was and what he did, his indignation meetings and his protests, the wade-ins at the beach. And so I will read a few of the published articles where he was speaking, and then I will read an article that I wrote for the Center for Public Justice back in 2020. So this is from the Daily Press, the Asbury Park and Ocean Grove Daily Press, Tuesday, June 28th, 1887. This was after one of the indignation meetings. Reverend Robinson was the pastor of the AME Zion Church on Springwood Avenue, which is St. Stephen's. And at the meeting, he was introduced as the president, and it records that there was a prolonged burst of applause for Mr. Robinson as he spoke. Friends and fellow citizens, I am glad to see you here tonight. I am here to speak dispassionately in defense of our rights and liberties. That is what we are here for. We will take no dictation from James A. Bradley or any other white man on the face of this earth. We own land, we raised the wheat, the corn, the cotton, and we helped save the Union. We are under the immediate protection of the general government. We love our race, and we propose to vindicate our race when it is imposed on us. A religion that looks at the color and not at the heart of a man is a howling lie. They have religion in their houses, but the devil is in their chimneys. Where the parlor is filled with guests, when did they refuse entrance to colored men when they wanted a glass of water or a cocktail? I am surprised that a man of Mr. Bradley's intelligence and financial worth should attempt to crush the liberties of a race. God gave the earth to man and all men, black and white, and Asbury Park Beach will be included. They say our bread and butter depends upon the white man and upon Mr. Bradley in particular. This article, which I hold in my hand from the pen of Mr. Bradley, he says that he is the father of it. It is his child, and we are here to nurse it. The Negroes of this town contribute to much towards its support and prosperity as the poor white people. Mr. Bradley and the white people object to the Negroes on the beach, where the free air of heaven blows. And yet, in the dining rooms, they're willing to have the Negroes sweat right over them. In the barbershops, white people are willing to have our black hands upon their faces, yet they object to our presence on the beach. What an intelligent man this Bradley is. Shall we still sit and bear it? No. Cries of no. We will go to the beach, and however bitter the pill for Mr. Bradley, he shall be made to swallow it. This was Reverend Robinson acknowledging the contradiction that you're good enough to serve us, you're good enough to work for us, yet on the beach, out in the air, you can't be seen here. And that was some of what Robinson was railing against. Here is a shorter clip from a passage in the AP Daily Press, July 5th, 1887. Some of the white people who came to Asbury Park were worse than the colored people, and their presence on the Ocean Plaza was more objectionable. There are classes among colored people, and he should not condemn them as a race because of the misconduct of a few. Mr. Bradley might just as well try to hang his handkerchief on the horns of the moon as to keep black men out from the beach. We fought for the liberty and salvation of this union, and we are going to enjoy the peace of it also. Those were Those were the words of Reverend Robinson, who did not show any fear in his direct critique of the founder of the city. And as I read these words, as I stand here, I'm wondering, where is the fire and passion in clergy these days? Here's an article that I wrote for the Center for Public Justice in 2020. This was in the aftermath of the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. The date on this is July 16th, 2020. I'll read selected passages. The title is Towards Justice, Ahmaud Arbery and a Public Justice Response. While out for a run in the Satilla Shores neighborhood on the outskirts of Brunswick, Georgia, 25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was killed shortly after 1 p.m. on February 23rd, 2020. Mr. Arbery was chased down by two white men with guns and murdered after an altercation. The indisputable facts of the case would suggest that the perpetrators were swiftly arrested and charged with murder. According to Georgia law, a person commits the offense of murder when he unlawfully and with malice aforethought, either express or implied, causes the death of another human being. The reality is that Travis and Gregory McMichael were not arrested until more than 70 days after the incident. It was only after authorities released video footage to the public and the true nature of the incident was revealed that authorities felt it necessary to begin their pursuit of justice. As a later update to the case, William Bryan Jr., who filmed the incident, had also been arrested and charged with felony murder and criminal attempt to commit false imprisonment. The family and friends of Mr. Arbery tried unsuccessfully to bring attention to this wrongdoing surrounding what Margaret Burnham and others have called Ahmaud Arbery's lynching. This incident says much more about the soul of this nation than it does about the culture of one town in Georgia that allowed such a thing to occur. In this Georgia town and across the country, whether explicit or not, racism is baked into our institutions, our systems, and structures. In this time since I began writing this article, it has come to light that 3 other black citizens, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Elijah McClain, were killed by law enforcement officers. These are only the ones that made it to the national media, and there are undoubtedly others. In George Floyd's case, all 4 officers involved, after weeks of nationwide protests, were arrested and charged with murder. The officers involved in the killings of Breonna Taylor and Elijah McClain were not charged. These 3 incidents and countless others are indicators of a society in which some lives are more valuable than others. To be clear, race is a social construct, meaning race is ascribed and not inherent. As such, as a student of theology and after learning about the history and movement of Christianity, I understand that the concept of a race was developed and employed to justify othering as a reasonable means of exclusion. This successful use of othering has been used to justify genocide, theft, rape, slavery, lynchings, and numerous other atrocities in America and across the globe. This construction of race and othering of humans creates a cultural narrative that runs counter to the commandments and requirements of our Christian faith. Christians believe that in the beginning, God designed and formed humanity in God's own image. As such, every human being reflects the very person of God and has inherent dignity, regardless of ability, age, class, sex, gender, race, nation of origin, culture, or ethnicity. I believe that this is because the unity that is achieved through the diversity is reflective of God's inexplicable divine image. Unfortunately, we as humans are flawed and fallen people who have perverted the good that God commanded for the world. The sins of arrogance and pride are culturally acceptable and have caused a further alienation from God. As a result, communities and relationships are haunted by fear, terror, and mistrust, and physical human differences are used to justify the mistreatment of others. The role of the government. The government is instituted by God and developed through humans. Through this incarnational work, Christians can be actively engaged in their political communities. Government is responsible for maintaining the general welfare of its citizens and it has a responsibility to promote just policies and practices that contribute to human flourishing. Government also has a responsibility to make space for the mediating institutions of civil society. These mediating institutions, including religious organizations, civic institutions, schools, clubs, businesses, etc., they shape our daily lives and are often best equipped to meet the needs of the people and help steward God's creation. In the case of Mr. Arbery, government did not uphold this responsibility. The police officers who responded to the scene on February 23rd failed to see what had happened for what it was. And intentionally or not, they failed Mr. Arbery and his family. As citizens, we can continue to advocate for justice for Mr. Arbery, for Mr. Floyd, for Ms. Taylor, for Mr. McLean, and others. We must also recognize that our responsibilities within institutions of civil society, of which we are a part. Civil society institutions are not distant, amorphous entities. They are guided and effectuated by citizens. Failure to actively engage in the transformation of civil society institutions is to leave Jesus hungry, thirsty, naked, and alone. Matthew 25, the New International Version, is where that came from. Yes. James 2:14 reads, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if you say that you have faith, but you don't do the works? Can faith save you?" This question brings into sharp focus the responsibility that Christian believers have in being called children of God. Our faith is to be used in addition to works, to affect things in the world. When we fail to do this, we fail to please God. And I will just say that in a nation divided, it is the individuals who can really make the difference. It's not government institutions. It's not the people out there. It is each and every one of us not allowing unfair treatment based on difference. And so hearing Reverend Robinson's words and hearing the words in this article, I think that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to help change the trajectory of our nation. And I hope and pray that you will help us in this effort. Thank you for listening, and have a great evening.
Okay, thanks, Reverend. I just have to say it's such a pleasure to see friends, long time and then first time here, all gathered together. And I'm particularly honored this evening to introduce the founder of this feast, the man who, as the private owner of the Stephen Crane House for more than 12 years, created this amazing little performance space that has seen so much over the years. Our great friend and benefactor, my teacher, my mentor, especially when it comes to puns, Mr. Frank D'Alessandro. Back there, stand up. I'm also thrilled to welcome back an artist, actor, playwright who has brought so much life and energy to this room over the years. Most recently in a world premiere play that we did about Cora Crane, Stephen Crane's common-law wife. And she is here tonight to reintroduce us to Margaret Whittemore, daughter of Asbury Park, who became the first winner of the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry and lived a charmed life among the literary lights of her day. So welcome all the way from Hell's Kitchen, Marjorie Kahn.
I'm Marjorie Kahn, and I used to live in Asbury Park for a good 10 years, probably from 2008 to 2018. And the Crane House is excruciatingly important to me because this is where I recreated my theater company called the Provincetown Fringe Festival, and it was in Provincetown, but then when I relocated here, I called it the Provincetown Fringe Festival in Asbury Park. And I did many, many performances here in the 10 years that I was here, and I also got married here at a very ripe age, well into my 70s. So the Crane House is really very special to me, and I am tonight, the person I am going to be reading from, as well as my own work, is Margaret Whittemore, who did live in Asbury Park, and she won the very first Pulitzer Prize in poetry. And then there's going to be another special treat, which isn't even on the program. My husband, a tuba player, and I found a CD of a concert that he had done, an experimental jazz trio with a clarinetist and a singer that was recorded in Asbury Park. I'm going to play a little clip of that, and that's very special to me because John is no longer here, or here. He's here somewhere, but his tuba playing is something that I lived with for close to 60 years, and I miss it. So, thank you. Okay. Margaret Whittemore. I'm going to start with a very short poem. It's called Goodbye, My Lover. All the flags stream abroad, and the crowds wave and cry. And I watch for your face in the long lines marching by. For my lips bade you go, but my heart would bid you stay. Oh lad, and will the war be long, and you so far away? And your step as you marched, would it lag or fall more true, if you know that my heart's gone to war with you? And now, whoops, the papers must fall on the floor. Golden Friends I Had. This is a book written by Margaret Whittemore, and I'm going to read 3 short passages from this book. The young from the hinterlands, it seemed to me, were having a rather self-admiring time sinning. They had daringly freed themselves from the trammels of convention. They were daringly doing everything from living in rooms by themselves and not telling Mama where they were going that afternoon, Mama being unusually a long way off, to having drinks and living in free love. They were forever talking about their sex and their soul, to quote Joyce Kilmer. But the stanza that haunted me that winter was one my mother used to sing us to sleep with. It began, "A kitten once to its mother said, 'I'll never more be good. I'll go and be a robber fierce and live in a dreary wood.'" Not that it was dreary, of course. It was young and excited. Naive, sheltered, reared in solitude and morality, I should, I suppose, have daringly freed myself from the same trammels. The trouble with me was that I'd been brought up the wrong way. Ministers' children, at least in my day, were not reared without knowledge about sin. Sin was what fathers worked in exactly as cobblers worked in shoes. It was no more of a novelty. My father worked 7 days a week on demolishing it by every means a man of dynamic fervor and ability could. He had what the family at least called a sinner's night once a week, when parishioners made appointments to come tell him all about it and be shown how to straighten out. Our town, Asbury Park, for one thing, was full of youngish alcoholics whose parents hadn't realized, bringing them there because it was prohibition, that all the druggists were MDs who could and did sell liquor blamelessly and continually on prescription. My father used to have them in and out of the house all the time. The boys, I mean, not the druggists. In all stages of repentance. In fact, he had many kinds of sinners in and out. And then we go to I have it all marked here. It's just a question of getting there. Here are the tabs. Okay, here we go. If you have been brought up on the ocean, you can sit and look at it forever. And I found a bench and sat, very contented, and presently pulled out some paper and a pencil and made some notes for a poem, and put them back in my handbag and looked at the ocean some more. Presently a man strolled up and sat on the other end of the bench without seeing me, and made some notes and put them in his coat pocket and looked at the ocean. He seemed nice, and he was. Presently he said, "Wasn't I Margaret Whittemore?" He said he had seen my picture somewhere. And I said, "Yes, I was." And he said he was Eugene O'Neill. I said, "Of course." And we began talking, as sometimes you do to people who talk on your own key. Which was why I was far from sure that he was Eugene O'Neill, because he thought the same things were amusing and the same people and books interesting that I did. Which always makes you, human vanity being what it is, feel that this is a very important person. And now the last selection from Margaret Whittemore. Till now, also, Gertrude Stein had merely been a name. There were tales, of course, many and various. One woman who had been a college mate of hers said that Miss Stein had begun her literary career by writing mediocre poetry of the usual and traditional kind, and one day said explosively that she wasn't getting anywhere with it, so she was going to do something to make people sit up. So she began her career all over again with work of the tender buttons kind. Tender buttons referring to nipples and clitorises. Okay, where am I? And people, of course, did sit up. The conservatives laughed. The radicals cried that they had discovered something new and wonderful, which Miss Stein agreed with. She intelligently settled in France, where the atmosphere was congenial. For they have seen everything, and neither explode with laughter over it in surprise or fall down and worship. That's Margaret Whittemore from Golden Friends I Had. And moving right along, this is something that I wrote, I don't know when, but what's described here is February 2020, middle of February 2020, in Asbury Park. It was just before the world turned upside down and inside out. Of course, we didn't know it then. We couldn't have imagined it. We just wanted to be together at the ocean. And it almost didn't happen. Two jealous friends overstepped their bounds, tried to fuck it up. "You're better off without her," said one friend. "You have to break up with her," said the other friend. And each one listened to their jealous friends and almost did what they said. But the 2 days away had already been planned, the hotel paid for, arrangements to care for the animals that would be left behind for 2 days. So we both bit our tongues, and the blood flowed, and we went. We didn't know the world would soon be upside down and inside out. It was still winter. One walked barefoot in the sand until her toes started turning blue. The other played her flute until her lips started turning blue, and her fingers turned to ice. And the next day, the bare footprint in the sand was still there. And you saw the footprint, and I heard you say, "Someone as crazy as you going barefoot in the cold?" But it was my footprint that was still there. And you cried out, "Your footprint is still here!" And you grabbed me and kissed me, and we took pictures, and we showered with soap smelling of rose and mandarin, and wrapped ourselves in terry cloth robes with hoods. And we ate gummies and made love, the screams of our orgasms merging with the sounds of gulls. not having any idea that the world was about to turn inside out and upside down. Could it have been more perfect? Well, the blood dripping for our tongues made it less so. But all we have now is this memory. How long can a memory sustain? Because the world is upside down and inside out, and there is no end in sight. Is the bare footprint in the sand still there? With that, the person that I wrote this poem about, my significant lover, we don't like significant other or partner, Kara, she's going to help me with this little last portion, which is a surprise. Are you going to get it set up?
Yeah, do you want me to tell the story?
Oh, you're going to tell the story.
Okay.
Yes.
Margie was practicing for this evening in one part of her apartment, and I was in the other part, hanging out in the kitchen. And while I was in the kitchen, the room next to me was a living room, and I'm just minding my own business in the kitchen, and I hear this. And I pick it up, and it is a CD, some music. Marjorie was married to John for many, many years. Marjorie had a theater company here many, many years
I'm
ago.
going to explain all that.
You are. I'm
But
sorry.
don't tell about...
Oop.
Yeah.
What do you want me to do?
No, what you were saying, but I mean, how was the...
Well, anyways, I just said, Marjorie, I think you have a musical suggestion.
It fell into the middle of the floor from God knows where, right?
Yes, I don't know where it came from.
And what
From
did
John.
you said?
I think John has
No,
a...
don't start it yet.
Oh, no.
We didn't rehearse this.
Oh, Jesus. Hold on.
Anyway,
I gotta cue it up. Okay, let's cue it.
this thing fell in the middle of a living room floor from we don't know where, because I don't remember this CD anywhere. And she came running into me and said,
John has a musical suggestion, I think, for this evening that you have your performance.
so this has been added, and we're just going to play a little bit of it. The group is called Anonymous. This is recorded February 16th, 2008. It was at the Garden Marketplace in Asbury Park, formerly known as El Lobo Negro Gallery. It's an experimental jazz trio, and it was part of the Music of Invention series. And it's Amy Shepard on voice, Perry Robinson on clarinet, and John Buckingham on tuba. And this is where we got married in 2009. And John is the tuba player.
There you
So did I, said it, say it, so did I, said it, say it, so today, said it, say it, so did I, said it.
Number 10.
Okay. Number 10, play.
You know, I knew I would miss everything every day, which I do, but I can't tell you how much I miss the tuba. I mean, I listened to it every day for 60 years of my life when he practiced. 60 years.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marge. Thank you, Kara. And thank you, John, wherever you are. I think you guys should send that to Paranormal Caught on Camera or something. That might be good for your show there. I wanted to point out that our sister organization, the Asbury Park Museum, which is founded by our Historical Society president, Kay Harris, recently did a pop-up exhibit at the library on the theme of trailblazing women of Asbury Park. And Margaret Whittemer was one of those trailblazing women, as was Helen Crane, but one that did not make the cut. Not because she wasn't a trailblazer, but just because she was born in Asbury Park and never came back to Asbury Park after the day she was born, was a woman by the name of Edna Woolman Chase. Now, the history of fashion in America owes so much to her as the influential editor of Vogue magazine, the one who really made Vogue into what it became. And here to reacquaint us with the impact of this woman is a recently minted friend of the Crane House, a dynamic writer on numerous topics, fashion maven, and a great designer in her own right. Give it up for Taisha Newman.
My name is Taisha Newman. We are at the Stephen Crane House. I will be doing a reading on Edna Woolman Chase. I will also be reading a feature I've written for Fresh Mix magazine, as I was previously one of their editors. The piece is called Legends in the Mix. My Instagram is the number 4 _ the letter U _ the number 2 _ LUV, for you to love. If you should happen to be looking for some of my writings, you can find some of my write-ups on indieflexmusic.com. I can also be found in every issue of Big Break magazine. I can also be found in Certified Hip Hop. I can be heard on the radio every Tuesday at 100.1 The Fam, doing my gossip segment called Views from the Brothel with the Pre-Show.
Hey guys, I have to tell you now, I have the worst news. I'm not into public speaking at all. But I do find that I've been very blessed to find out about Miss Edna. So Miss Edna Woolman Chase was born in Asbury Park on March 14th in 1877. Edna was editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine from 1914 to 1952. She died on March 21st, 1957, and I will be reading from her memoir, Always in Vogue. And it reads, I have previously mentioned the rewards and financial success attainable by women in the fashion field. And I suppose most people assume that fashion publications are rich pastures, which within limits they are. But I should like to mention outstanding examples of this kind of success that 2 other women not in publishing have achieved. They are Miss Dorothy Shaver, the president of Lord & Taylor, a $50 million corporation, and Miss Toby Collier Davis. I admit that Miss Shaver's achievement is not based exclusively on the mold. Lord & Taylor carried household furnishings as well as clothes and accessories. But it is the great taste and tempered knowledge of this lady, her style sense in all departments, as well as her executive ability that have brought her to her present eminence and made her one of the highest salaried women in America. The other Miss Davis, or Toby, as she's known professionally, works in fashion only, but every facet of it. Her syndicated column, Toby Says, has estimated circulation of 4 million. With Julia Coburn, she directs a school for fashion careers, unique of its kind, and she advises more than 1,000 stores on fashion trends, compiling, printing, and mailing weekly a 50-page report telling her clients how and where to buy the clothes customers will shortly be demanding. Toby didn't invent skirts, sweaters, blouses, slim pants, and years ago brimley dresses, but she foresaw their imminent popularity, and by advising the nation stores accordingly, this made clothes great fashion forwards and made incidentally millions of dollars for the manufacturers and merchants. Toby started on her own humbly enough in 1927. 10 years later, she and Julia Coburn opened their now booming school where career-minded girls may get an excellent foundation in the practicalities of fashion. In 1937, also an allied institute got underway. The Museum of Costume Art, now the Costume Institute, affiliated with the Metropolitan Museum, of which I am happy to serve as a member of the advisory committee. The institute was originally founded by a group active in the theater and included the late Irene Lawson, Aileen Bernstein, Lee Sampson, and Clarice Stein, and Mary Radin. Today, Pilar Westman is the executive director and a vital spirit in the organization. The Institute was set up for 460 articles of dress, mostly donated by Lee Simonson and Irene. The collection now numbers thousands of pieces of clothing, men, women, and children, that have been gathered from all over the world. Dating from the 17th century to present day, they record the changing fashions of 3 centuries, and the fabrics range from brocades to organzas, from velvets to tweeds. They vary from the wardrobe of Queen Alexandra to the trousseau of a Romanian peasant bride, and today their loveliest gowns are donated to the museum by women of society, fashion, and theater. I should say the most striking aspect of the clothes is their size. Even in the early years of this century, they were small by today's standard, and in the 18th and 19th century, they were tiny. When some of them are borrowed annually to be exhibited at the 7th Avenue's Party of the Year, where to find the girls to model them is the real problem. It's fun to wander between the great racks where the clothes hang in orderly rows. There is something curiously moving about the faintly rusting taffetas, the stately velvets, and the distinguished broadcloths, about the jeweled headdresses and wool embroidered peasant trousers, the silk embroidered tails of the 18th centuries, dandies, all of these frivolities, I guess, of the humanity, all still defining the contours of owners long since dust. The children's clothes are the most touching of all, and the tiny frocks and breeches and aprons that charmed or harassed their small wearers. So I chose this part of the book because it really just seems like she's talking about the power of fashion and how it was used to change the lives of women when she was actually the editor-in-chief. I feel like she persevered through a lot of things throughout the book. She talks about how she ran into certain issues with a lot of men being in the industry and there not being a lot of women in the office, and she's taking it upon herself to create her own staff of women and then building relationships with women who could have been thought to be nobody because she didn't know who they would become, but she built the right relationships to take her to where she arrived. Next, I will be reading a piece that I wrote as fashion editor in Fresh Mix magazine. It is a magazine based out of Atlanta, Georgia. It is owned by DJ Waffles. The name of the piece is Legends in the Mix. And it says, I don't think artists understand that fashion and style are both extremely valuable tools in the industry. There are so many ways you can use clothes to create the ideal image. You can cause all kinds of emotions through the pieces in your wardrobe. Just wearing a full black and white Adidas sweatsuit and with shell toes makes anyone think about who. If you see a trash bag blowing in the wind full of air while it's raining, who dances into your thoughts? If you love hip-hop, and you do, otherwise you wouldn't be reading this, you already know. Let 3 girls walk in a room in overalls, leg warmers, and crop tops and tell me they don't look like familiar strangers. What I'm saying is taking things that your favorite artists have worn and making them your own pays homage to who they are to you, the artist, and also dares their energy to come anywhere near you. With the amount of losses the music industry has taken recently, it is clear that the universe is making room for the ones next in line. When will we see the next Jimi Hendrix? Does anyone have tickets to see the artist that spawned in 2021 because of Frankie Lyman? Perhaps the strange fruit that fell from Nina Simone's tree can let you in on a secret. The legendary people who have walked this earth left something behind for us, long before the industry said what you have to wear or how you have to sound. The Isley brothers found their shadows right behind the Migos without realizing they were gone. Ray Charles said his final goodbyes at Jamie Foxx's doorstep and left a message under the welcome mat because he was. Aretha Franklin had Jennifer Hudson's dress tailor-made from the notes she played on her piano. Grace Jones pushed Tiana Taylor out on the set of Boomerang and everybody thought it was part of the movie. Whitney Houston was Brandy's dream come true before she was even tired. Tina Turner rolled on a river so Beyonce can bathe in it. All these artists reflected their clear inspiration through their style of dance and their mannerisms. Look back at the references and you will see, look back at the references and you will see that you can dress for the energy you want, being a supernova and feeling comfortable among the clouds. Learning that inspiration is not the same thing as plagiarism. Knowing that Diana Ross does not want to die the day she closes her eyes. Lynn Whitfield does not want to be the last woman buried in a mermaid sequence dress. Phyllis Hyman is looking down right now yelling, "Don't let them forget the hats." At this moment, the hip-hop industry is holding an open call for the greats. Our audience is looking for evolving ancestors, artists that can't be dismissed and won't be, the ones who make you look twice and blink once. It's the look, the sounds, and the presence that's going to bring you your gifts. Be sure to be well-dressed when you arrive to receive them. Remember, darling, the show must go on, and in good fashion. Last part, I'm just going to say that I would like to thank Tom for bringing Edna Woolman Chase to my knowledge. Though I am a huge Vogue fan, like many others, I only know about Anna Wintour, Grace Cunnington, and the late great Andre Leon Talley. I am proud to say that without my knowledge, I have had her 1928 cover original poster in my bathroom for the last 9 years. Funny she was present for my journey to editor-in-chief in the very place I shed the most tears in my time of anguish. I've always welcomed legendary energy, but it seems to find me even when I'm not looking. So here's to Miss Edna Woolman Chase. May she rest in peace, knowing that I am traveling the streets she paved in Vogue.
All right, I gotta say, folks, just for a boomer era reference, I feel kind of like Ed Sullivan tonight, wrangling all these acts. We got a bunch of plate spinners from Lithuania waiting in the next room to go on. And another thing that Ed Sullivan used to do, as I recall from my youth, was he would introduce celebrities in the audience. And I have one sitting right there behind the camera that I wanted to introduce to you. This is a figure who's made a big mark on the local music scene and the big world beyond. A hit songwriter, a solo artist, an original Broadway cast member of Beatlemania, a member of Styx and the Orchestra, which is the touring version of the Electric Light Orchestra here in the 21st century. And now with his great band, the Weaklings, who are just putting out a new record, I believe this week, or maybe a couple days ago. Mr. Glenn Burtnick. Glenn is in a different country every time I hear from him. And today he's in Asbury Park, of all places, of all the gin joints in all the world. And tomorrow he'll probably be on, I don't know, King Kong Skull Island or someplace like that. He's everywhere at once. But he's a great guy. And speaking of the music scene in Asbury Park, if you were to ever take a walking tour of the local music scene, I gotta say it's more than just a stone pony. If you were to say walk down 8th Avenue, and you might notice a house that had iron wagon wheels embedded in the porch railings. Now why is that? Well, Wagon Wheels was the name of a hit song for a fella named Bing Crosby, maybe you heard of him. And it just so happens that the composer of that tune maintained a home right there on 8th Avenue. His name was Peter D. Rose. He also wrote Deep Purple, which was a big hit. And he also wrote It's a Marshmallow World in the Winter, which comes up every December. And he was just one half of a dynamic partnership with May Singy Breen. May Singy Breen was a songwriter, a humanitarian, the first woman elected to the Ukulele Hall of Fame. And together, she and Peter were the sweethearts of the air on their NBC radio show for many years. They wrote dozens of songs together. And maybe someday, if we keep working at it, they'll get named Asbury Angels. And here to shine light on the music of May Singy Breen is one of her musical descendants here in Asbury Park, a singer, a songwriter, and a ukulele teacher, whose new record is now up and streaming. So give it up for Deirdre Forrest.
Hi, I'm Deirdre Forrest. I'm here tonight to sing the songs of May Singy Breen. So I'm doing a couple songs by her and a couple of my own songs on the ukulele. I'm really excited to be here. I'm the only one singing tonight, which is kind of cool. So I'm honored that they asked me to do that. And on Instagram, Deirdre Forrest Music, D-E-I-R-D-R-E. I know that's always a tricky one to spell. And on Facebook, same name, And I have some new singles out. I'm going to put some more music out in the coming months too. So look me up and look out for my new music. And thank you to everybody involved in tonight's show. I'm really excited to participate in it. Hello. Hello. Hi. I'm very excited to be like the only person singing tonight. This is cool. I'm not used to that. I'm used to sharing a lineup with a lot of singers, so this is pretty cool. Thanks to Tom for asking me to play this, and my friend Brenda Worth, who got me in contact with Tom for this awesome show. I was looking up May, doing a lot of research on her, because I love the ukulele, and I had never heard of her, and I just like fell down the rabbit hole, Wikipedia rabbit hole, as one does. And she was credited, which I think this is one of the coolest things about her, she was credited for getting publishers to put ukulele chords on the sheet music. That wasn't done before she kind of campaigned for it and asked them to do it. And I love, as a fellow female musician, I thought she was pretty badass and pretty cool, and a pioneer. And so I'm going to do a couple of her songs and then one of mine. My songs are very different than hers, but I also write on the ukulele quite a bit. And one of, Tom gave me a bunch of her sheet music, so this was a really cool project for me. He has, actually Michael Brett, who's here, wherever he is, hiding somewhere, he helped me, oh there you are, hey! My musical counterpart helped me kind of go through all the sheet music of hers from the 20s to the 60s and kind of pick out a few songs that would be fitting for my voice and that I thought were really a cool representation of her songwriting. So she wrote quite a bit, because ukulele, she wrote quite a bit of Hawaiian sounding things. And this is one of them, it's called Lani. That she wrote with her husband, Peter DeRose, and it was, as I said before, it was really interesting doing this project because there's really not a whole lot of recordings of her songs out there. So, as I said before, she was credited with getting those ukulele chords on there, so that was a big help, especially with this song because this is an older song of hers. That's called When You're Gone, I'll Miss You. like ours had no regret, dear. Though we both had loved before. All through my life I want you only, and I know you want me too. Now each day when I feel lonely, I'll keep thinking, dear, of you. When you're gone, I know I'll miss you. Someday we'll have to part. When you're gone, I long to kiss you. None can mend my broken heart. Life for me would be so weary. I'll miss your smile and cheer. When you're gone, I won't forget you. When you're gone, I'll miss you, dear. When you're gone, I know I'll miss you. Someday we'll have to part. When you're gone, I long to kiss you. None can mend my broken heart. Life for me will be so weary. I'll miss your smile and cheer. When you're gone, I won't forget you. When you're gone, I'll miss you, dear. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Such a fun event. Everybody that went in the first half, you guys were amazing. I was listening back there in the wings. Thank you again to everybody involved and North to Shore Festival. There's so many amazing events going on. And thank you for choosing this event when there's a bunch of events going on around town tonight. All right, this is one of mine. Let's see. So, this is one I've been working in the studio on recently, Mr. Steve Greenwell. And it's called Foundling. And it's kind of about looking back at your life. I'm older than I look. Don't laugh at that. It's because I work with kids. That's why I'm youthful. Looking back at your life and kind of assessing it and taking stock of things and making a path forward. If I pause for a second too long, will I be forever stuck? A whirling dervish of bad luck, my self-doubt running amok. If I stare at it too long, will it bubble to the surface? My obsession with being perfect, will I ever believe I'm deserving? I haven't earned, still so much to unlearn, and I'm only getting older. But oh, if I let myself win, will it end or just begin? Will I fizzle or will I smolder? give up and confess? Will I quit accepting less? If I call her and forgive her, and I turn the other cheek, will I find the peace I seek? Stop believing that I'm weak. Oh, there's so much I haven't learned, still so much to unlearn, and I'm only getting older. Oh, if I let myself win, will it end or just begin? Will I fizzle or will I smolder? How I wish the quiet would gather around. 30 years and counting, and my feet can't find the ground. Would you be my guide to something solid, stable, sound? I wanna finally be found. Oh, there's so much I haven't learned, still so much to unlearn, and I'm only getting older. Oh, if I let myself win, will it end or just begin? Will I fizzle or will I smolder? Oh, there's so much I haven't learned, still so much to unlearn, and I'm only getting older. Oh, if I let myself win, will it end or just begin? Will I fizzle or will I smolder? Oh, there's so much I haven't learned, still so much to unlearn, and I'm only getting older. Thank you guys so much. Thanks again to everybody involved.
Hey, how many of you old-timers out there remember a fellow by the name of Lowell Thomas? He was, I can't understate how famous that guy was in his day. Radio personality, newsreels, early television, globe-trotting travel writer, newsman of sorts. His signature line, as I recall, when he closed out every one of his programs was, "So long." Now, he was not born in Asbury Park, he was not raised here, but he has a deep connection to the city, where he happened to write his breakthrough book, With Lawrence in Arabia. Yeah, he's the one who started the whole Lawrence in Arabia thing. And he wrote it at the home of his parents, who lived here in Asbury Park. In fact, his father even ran unsuccessfully for city council once. And he made lots of public appearances here in town, and he sponsored the high school student magazine for Asbury Park High School, The Beacon. So in 1930, famous celebrity Lowell Thomas wrote an article for The Beacon entitled, "In Defense of the Original American." Sounds positive, doesn't it? Well, we happen to have what just might be the sole surviving copy of that article. Probably never read out in public, and probably for a good reason. And we have here to share it with us the director of the Sandhill Indians Historical Association, Claire Garland.
Hi, I'm Claire Garland. I'm the director of the Sandhill Indian Historical Association, and I live here in Monmouth County. I'm glad to participate in this today. I'm reading a response to Lowell Thomas, the writer, giving some information about my ancestors who moved here to West Park, which was west of Asbury Park, in the 1870s. I've got a website up, sandhillindianhistory.org, and also a Facebook page, Sandhill Indian History, and also a recent published essay, Indian Summer at Sandhill. He starts out with the Indian, which right away I know there's going to be trouble, because he says the Indian had an immense capacity for hate and revenge. First of all, who is the Indian? You're talking about millions of people. North America, South America, Central America, Alaska. Who is the Indian? It made me think of the story of Penelope Stout, who was from Amsterdam on her way to New Amsterdam, which we call Manhattan. They were shipwrecked, probably in a sandbar, off Sandy Hook. They were attacked, she was injured, her husband died, but she wouldn't leave him. And she crawled into a log and thought she would die there. But along came Pampamora. Pampamora was an Navasink person who took her back to his village, nursed her back to health, and probably put her in a canoe and took her back to New Amsterdam. There she married an English person named Richard Stout. They were Quakers, kind of, who were being persecuted by the Dutch. They decided to come over across the bay to Middletown, 1662, and they bought land, and Middletown was founded in the 1660s. As time went by, Pampamora also saved her again by letting her know that there was going to be an attack on the village. So he saved Penelope Stout. In Middletown, where I live, a couple of years ago, they just put up a new municipal building. On the front of this building is a sign, kind of a design of an Indian head, representing Pampamora and the Navasink Indians. Also, as you go in the lobby of the building, there's a huge rug, probably 20 feet wide, and right in the middle of that rug is that Indian head for Pampamora and the Navasink tribe. So as far as the capacity for hate and revenge, if we go back to 1660s and look here at the Navasink people, there's an example of someone who was not full of hate and revenge. Of course, we all know the stories of the Pilgrims and the Puritans being fed and clothed and helped, and the survival that the Wampanoag people brought them and saved them. And you can go just about anywhere in the country, along any of the coasts, and find the same kinds of stories where they were welcomed with an open hand, because the natives were used to trading. They had been trading for thousands of years. They just didn't all of a sudden start trading in 1492. This had been going on for hundreds of years. One thing I just ran across as I was doing research this winter was the number of diplomatic trips that went back and forth to England. Now, I never knew about it. I never knew there were diplomats. But there was one trip in 1732 to the King of England, and another one in 1762, which we ended up with the proclamation of 1763, which of course blew up the whole country. So it's not that they didn't try. They did try. They tried to be diplomats. They wanted to trade. They wanted to get along. And some places they did. But the fact is, you cannot say the Indian, because you're talking about 576 different federally recognized tribes of people, different nations, people who can't understand each other. If I said European, what would you say? Greek, English, Russian, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese? So European is the same kind of term as the Indian. Now, many of them don't even accept the term Indian. They don't accept American Indian. They don't accept Native American. It's a political term to them. They accept their nation of Sioux or Crow or Cherokee. That's who they are, not Indian. Indian is something that Europeans brought here and called them. In fact, they used to call them the Americans because they were the English or the French or the Dutch or something. And then when they started blowing up the English, they decided they were going to be the Americans too. So they co-opted the name Americans in a sense from the people they were called Indians. The Sandhill people, my grandmother's people, were reported in a Smithsonian Institution report in 1948 as living here in Sandhill. They bought the property, about 20 acres, from James Bradley. and moved here from Tinton Falls and Eatontown because James Bradley was developing the area, and there was so much building going on, and they were builders, that they just moved, and that's how my grandmother and my father and me, that's how we got here. The tax records for Shrewsbury go back to 1780 for the Raby family. They had over 100 acres of land here in Tinton Falls and Eatontown, which at the time was called Shrewsbury. I do have military records that go back to 1791. And of course they were allowed to fight, and you had to join a side. You couldn't be neutral, and that's kind of the sad part, because if you wanted to not get involved in this conflict, you weren't allowed that. Even, I mean, the loyalists had to choose. They had to either leave or join the effort. And so they, I guess, joined the effort and fought with the Americans. The language barriers, I'm working on a project now with Princeton University. The Muncie Language Project is saving the Muncie language. And we use it every day, we don't even think about it, like Wanamassa was Chief Wanamassa, Manasquan, Matawan, Metedeconk, Piscataway, Mamaroneck, Canarsie, Manhattan. I mean, you could go Poughkeepsie, you could go, I mean, out of our 50 states, half of them are names of nations, our rivers, our Mississippi, Missouri, all the rest of it. So we're already speaking the language. We just don't realize it. Lowell goes on to say that everyone made the Indians suspicious. And it's like, well, you kind of are suspicious of everyone, in a sense, until you get to know them. And of course, smallpox and diphtheria and diseases and epidemics, it's just amazing as you read through the historical record how many epidemics there were. I mean, we just came through one, we think, oh, wow, we just had an epidemic. These were kind of constant, always there, always somewhere. There was something breaking out. As they traveled around, they were warned to go around this, go around that, go through there, stop here, don't go to Albany because of something that had broken out, which I never really realized. He criticizes the men for not raising the children. Well, men didn't raise children. Men still don't raise children. Women raise children. And women were the teachers of the next generation, which led me in my essay that I just had published by Rutgers this winter called Indian Summer at Sand Hill. I kind of focused on the women of the community because the men have had a lot of, all the stories are about the men. The men did this, the men built the boardwalk, now the men built Ocean Grove, the men built Asbury Park, the men did everything. What about the women who were the glue that held the community together, who raised the children, who kept the churches going, and who maintained the glue of the community and the home environment that made them the community that they were? He says, the Indian doesn't have any self-control, especially under drinking. Well, who does? If you're under the influence of something, you're not going to have much control. And that just comes from being a human being, not being an Indian. It was a definite clash of culture. In some places, they were able to merge with the settlers who were there, especially the Swedes and the Finns. They especially got along better than the English and the Dutch. So it depends on the group you're talking about, when you're talking about, the place you're talking about. You just can't make a stereotypical statement and put everybody in the same box, because you're dealing with different groups, different settlers, different times, different places, and it's all different. You can't make a statement like Lowell Thomas did. In 1540, there was a shipwreck off the coast of the Carolinas, and 340 horses and hogs swam ashore. The hogs trampled the crops, rooted up gardens, knocked down fences. Of course, the horses are still here. We're still dealing with them. This caused a lot of ill will. And you know yourself, if somebody's dog comes on your property, you're not going to be too happy about it. So for the communities to have to adjust to these new creatures, bringing their swine, flu, and diseases, the horses, a whole new cultural upheaval to their environment. I mean, we check everything at the border. We don't even want anything in here that doesn't belong, that's going to take over our native species. The two cultures, Lowell says, could not survive together. But many communities were able to survive. In fact, I brought a new book just to show you, if you'd like to get it. It's called Separate Paths, and it's written, but it's just out recently, it's not even old, by Jean Sutherland, who was a professor at Lehigh University. She's got several books out, but she talks in this book especially about the Quaker community in South Jersey, the Swedes, the Finns, and it's all based on primary sources, all primary records, wills, deeds, land transfers, the concessions, the agreements, the town meetings and minutes, and quite a bit on controlling people's dating behavior, huh? Let's just say it that way. So it's just interesting to see what it was like 400 years ago in our part of the world. A growing economy here in New Jersey needed workers. So when people say, oh, they all moved away, well, they didn't all move away. There were pockets of communities all over this area because there was work that they needed to get done. They needed to get done. Of course, many things were agricultural, which phased out over time. But there was building. There was all kinds of transportation needs. And it's interesting just to see how communities fit into the areas that were growing. Of course, some were pushed out. Some were pushed out through eminent domain. And we lost our home too, here in Neptune, through eminent domain. So it's one of those things that everyone deals with at one time or another. Life is like a baseball team. There's a spot for everybody somewhere. So, thank you. And I'd also like to invite you to a program on Saturday for Juneteenth in Tinton Falls at 3 o'clock at the Crawford House. Rick Gefkin, also a local author, is doing a program, and you're welcome to come.
Now, as for Stephen Crane was, in my opinion, a newspaperman above all else. It's a discipline that he practiced all throughout his life as a writer. His journalist's eye informed his best fiction, and his work as a reporter made him famous, made him admirers, and practically got him run out of Asbury Park on a rail. But so much great writing comes from the ranks of beat reporters, and the beat goes on here in the 21st century. As a veteran reporter and editor for both the Asbury Park Press and the Star-Ledger, has found his calling as an ace author of crime and suspense novels, the most recent of which is Heaven's a Lie. He's here to reintroduce us to the prodigious body of work by another prolific author who began his career with the Asbury Park Press, the late Fred J. Cook. So here to file the story on deadline is our great friend, Wallace Strobey.
Hi, my name is Wallace Strobey, and I'm here at the Crane House in Asbury Park, New Jersey, where tonight we had a celebration of Asbury Park, old and new, in terms of the writing about the city over the years. Beginning, of course, with Stephen Crane, who was immortalized and who lived in this very house. I wrote about and read a piece from a longtime journalist named Fred J. Cook, who lived in nearby Interlaken. And Fred was an amazing guy, had an amazing career. He started the Asbury Park Press in 1936, I believe. I started at the Asbury Park Press in 1985, but it was the exact same building, and the pay was probably around the same. But it was great to get a chance to come, and this house is full of Asbury Park history. And I was born and raised in Long Branch, so I was only 5 minutes away. So Asbury was always a big thing for me. There were movie theaters, and then as I got older, there were clubs everywhere. So I always feel spiritually connected to this place, even though I don't specifically live there at the moment. Thanks for coming, everybody. I have Tom to thank for putting me, for inviting me, and also for letting me know the history of Fred J. Cook, who was the essence of a investigative reporter, and he wrote a book about it called Maverick, 50 Years of Investigative Reporting. Now, Fred Cook he was born in Point Pleasant, but he lived most of his life right close by here in Interlaken, where he passed away in 2003 at age of 92. Cook had a remarkable career. His first journalism job was as a reporter at the Asbury Park Press on Cookman Avenue. He started there January 1st, 1933 at a salary of $20 a week. I started at the press as a reporter in the same building in January 1986, 53 years later. I think the pay was about the same. Cook went on to work for the New York World Telegram and Sun in the 1940s and 50s, and for decades he was a contributor to the magazine The Nation, where he wrote exposés about Senator Joseph McCarthy, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, the Ku Klux Klan, the Jersey Mob, and many others. He was at one point convinced that the FBI was opening his mail at the Asbury Park Post Office, because he was getting it and it had already been opened. He turned many of his stories into books, nearly 50 in all, and he wrote about his long career in his 1984 memoir, Maverick, as I mentioned. Let me just get smaller here for a second. What I want to read, though, goes back to much earlier in his history, in an event that almost ended his career. So imagine it's Thursday, May 6, 1937. Fred Cook, at age 26, is the editor of a small Tom's River weekly, the New Jersey Courier, long defunct. One of his beats is the Naval Air Station nearby Lakehurst. And this is what he wrote in 1985. Today, with jets spanning the ocean in hours and rockets propelling men to the moon, it may be hard to feel the romance and promise of lighter-than-air travel. German dirigibles floated serenely across the vast spaces of the ocean. Graf Zeppelin flying to Brazil, the Hindenburg to the United States. The two airships kept regular schedules, except in the winter, and their flights had been so smooth and uneventful that passengers complained that nothing ever happens. Dirigibles, it seemed at the time, represented the future of long-distance air travel. And then came the Hindenburg's inaugural flight of the 1937 tourist season, a flight from Frankfurt to Lakehurst. From the start, the voyage was beset with trouble. The Hindenburg encountered exceptionally strong west winds over the Atlantic. She was delayed for hours. Since this was the first flight of the year, and since the Hindenburg's American terminal was at Lakehurst, the transatlantic crossing was of major interest to us at the paper. But our little country weekly was saddled with a flatbed press of 1850s vintage, and we could print only a limited number of papers in a given period of time. The Courier went on the streets on Friday morning, but we had to run off about 1,000 copies late Thursday afternoon to have enough to distribute to the northern and southern parts of the county. The Hindenburg was scheduled to arrive at Lakehurst on May 6, a Thursday, but with the delays it was uncertain just when she would arrive. I had to write a story that would read up to the minute on Friday morning. This is where things started to get bad. The hours rolled past, and I fretted, keeping in constant touch with the public relations officer at Lakehurst. Finally, in early afternoon, he assured me that the Hindenburg was all right. She was coming down the coast, would fly over New York City, cruise slowly, waiting for the wind to die down at dusk before nosing to her mooring mast in Lakehurst. Arrangements had been made to refuel her there, and she would take off again at midnight, carrying passengers to Europe. Shortly after this had been described to me, we heard the sound of motors, and then there was the proud, silvery Hindenburg herself, coasting along right above our heads in the sky above Main Street in front of the Courier office. With that sight, I was all set. I went to my typewriter and I wrote a page one story for our Friday morning paper describing what was supposed to happen exactly as it had happened. We closed up the page and began Thursday run. Satisfied, I went home to have dinner with my wife, Julia. I hadn't planned to go to Lakehurst to watch the arrival because my story was all written and there was nothing else to say. But Julia said, after all, this was her first trip of the year and I'd like to see her land, and so we went. I I had a pass admitting us to the air station, and we parked our car and walked down to the spot near the mooring mast. There had been a late afternoon shower, but the skies were clearing as the Hindenburg circled slowly and majestically in the sky. Then she drifted across the airfield and nose down toward the mooring mast. The forward landing lines were cut and dropped into the hands of the ground crew. The motors went off, and then, like twin bolts of lightning, 2 giant spurts of flame jetted from her tail. It was a breathless half-second pause, and then with a thunderous roar, flame shot skyward. The stern section buckled, and the whole mighty craft came crashing to the ground in a ball of flame. Julie and I turned and took 2 horrified running steps. By then it was all over. The modern marvel was a burning, smoking skeleton. One instant, the Hindenburg floated across the field, passengers in a forward cabin waving to friends and relatives on the ground. The next instant, the volatile hydrogen gas that filled the huge bags and kept her almost afloat, went up in one whoosh, and what I judged to be 30 seconds prior to the sky was a twisted heap of rubble. When the shock and horror wore off, I shuddered at the idea of the piece I had written that was to appear on the streets the next morning. I would have to retrieve those papers from the early run and write a new, entirely different story. I left Julie in the press room and ran back to the field to the site of the still smoldering wreckage. Ambulances came screaming into the field, and with them a Marine sergeant. "Get out of here," he ordered. I showed him my past and argued that I was a newspaperman and had to cover the story for my paper. All he said in even angrier, more peremptory tone was, "Get out of here now." Back in the press room, all was bedlam. The rest of the night passed in a blur of activity. I stayed at Wakehurst as long as I could to get additional details. Then Julie and I drove back to the courier office in Toms River. She got on the phone, helped to round up the staff, and I went to work at the typewriter. By the time daylight came, we had retrieved the papers from the Thursday afternoon run that had been sent across the street to the post office. It hadn't gone out yet. I had written one of the most graphic stories of my life. We had torn apart page 1 and splashed it across the page, the largest 8-column type that we had, and we had the old press rolling. 36 persons died in the wreck of the Hindenburg. 64 others survived, some so bad we burned that they were confined to area hospitals for weeks. Official inquiries concluded that static electricity had probably caused the spark that had ignited the hydrogen gas, but many believed there had been sabotage. Whatever the cause, the age of lighter-than-air travel died in the rubble of the Hindenburg's charred ribs.
Interesting.
And that was Fred Cook in 1984, looking back on his days as a cover reporter for Lakehurst. I'm not going to read anything of my own. I can't compete with that. It's a fascinating book about New Jersey history and New Jersey press, especially. He was also a witness to the Morro Castle. Everybody was a witness to the Morro Castle because it sat out there for so long. He later became, a real investigative journalist and earned the anger of J. Edgar Hoover. And he was very involved in the Alter His case, and which nobody remembers now, but a lot of Ocean County coverage of corruption. Corruption in Ocean County was obviously out of hand in the 1930s. If you read any of his stories, there were gambling ships. It was a crazy period of time. So that's my tribute by reading his own words to Fred Cook, who lived and died not very far from here.
Thank you, Wallace. Let's see, have we forgotten anybody? Stephen Crane. Stephen Crane, the namesake of this house, and Asbury Park's premier claim to literary fame. As the resident docent here at the house, I got to tell you that Crane remains the main attraction. We have college professors, teachers, students, researchers, filmmakers, and just plain fans of Crane have found their way to our doorstep from all across the United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, and many other places in the big world beyond. Crane continues to inspire major biographies, including the 800-page Burning Boy, whose author, the noted novelist Paul Auster, was our guest here at this house last November. But one of my personal favorite studies of Stephen Crane and his place in local history was but a single chapter in a book entitled 4th of July, Asbury Park, a book which was recently published in a newly expanded edition and which I, for one, have cited as one of the essential pieces of writing on the roller coaster social history of this delightfully diverse but so often divided town. We are honored this evening to welcome here the author of that book, Daniel Wolfe.
Yeah. Hey, my name is Daniel Wolfe. I'm going to be reading tonight from Stephen Crane and about Stephen Crane, because I wrote a book about Asbury Park called 4th of July, Asbury Park, and you should read it. And if you want to find more of my work, Google is a good idea. Oh, you guys are brave to still be here.
Worth waiting for.
Well, we'll see about that. If I don't use the mic, can you hear me fine?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, thanks, that gives me an extra hand. You put that on the floor. I'm always pleased to be in Asbury Park. I'm particularly honored to be in the Stephen Crane House. And I want to thank all involved, Tom, Kay, Frank, Don, I don't know who all was part of this.
Susan.
Susan, thank you. Thank you. I'll talk a little bit about Stevie Crane, as we say, little Stevie Crane. You know, the polite way to talk about Stephen Crane is that he was a rebel. You hear that. He was a troublemaker. I mean, he was really trouble, in a great way. And I got a sense at the beginning of the evening when they read from Helen Crane, his mother's work, you got a feeling of what he was up against, right? Where she was saying, here's how you dress, here's how you act. You know, she must have been doing that to her son as well. And he didn't want any part of it, right? He was from a good Methodist family, and he thought they were full of it. He had no interest in that. So he rebelled as much as he could. I'm going to read from 4th of July, Asbury Park, a little profile of Stephen. He was the way I saw it, he was sort of James Bradley's main enemy, though James Bradley probably didn't know him. But everything that James Bradley stood for, Stephen Crane was against. Here's a little picture of him as probably a late adolescent. Crane, meanwhile, haunted the shore. A description by his girlfriend of the time paints a picture of a loner in the midst of the tumble-bumble of a beach town. He was abjectly poor and undernourished, ate little, and seemed to resent others eating heartily. With a cigarette hanging off his lower lip and his battered, unkept clothes, Crane would walk the boardwalks, observing life, stopping for a day's ice cream, that's a brand, though he could barely afford it, and taking his lover on the new sensation, the Kingsley Avenue merry-go-round. I was just at the Carousel building earlier. Not far from the big observation wheel, right about where the briars had first torn into Bradley's clothes, the Carousel house had gone up in 1888. The glittering machine spun in a special four-sided pavilion with multicolored sliding doors and brilliant murals of boardwalk scenes. Its array of elegantly carved, shiny wooden horses could carry 78 passengers at a time. Mirrors reflected their speeding images, and there was the added excitement of leaning out into the wind and reaching for the brass ring that guaranteed a free ride. It was pointless, of course, this spinning in circles, a diversion from Jacob Rice's social crusade, but Crane and his girl wrote it over and over, then would walk together along the shore. Steve particularly enjoyed watching the surf, his lover remembered. He would tell her that whenever she saw the ocean, she would think of him. To be a good writer, you have to be an egomaniac, and that the poor woman had to think of him every time she looked at the ocean is, I think, astonishing. So Tom mentioned that Steve was a reporter covering Asbury Park, and there was one article that made him famous, and I want to read part of that. It was from 1892, when he was supposed to be writing fluff pieces about how nice Asbury was and how everybody should come. And instead he wrote this. The parade of the Junior Order of United American Mechanics here on Wednesday afternoon was a deeply impressive one to some persons. There were hundreds of the members of the order, and they wound through the streets to the music of enough brass bands to make furious discords. It probably was the most awkward, ungainly, uncut, and uncarved procession that ever raised clouds of dust on sun-beaten streets. Nevertheless, the spectacle of an Asbury Park crowd confronting such an aggregation was an interesting sight to a few people. Asbury Park creates nothing. It does not make, it merely amuses. When I was researching my book, it occurred to me that the service economy was invented by Asbury Park, right? We don't make anything anymore. So, there is a factory where nightshirts are manufactured, but it is some miles from town. This is a resort of wealth and leisure, of women and considerable wine. The throng along the line of march was composed of summer gowns, lace parasols, tennis trousers, straw hats, and indifferent smiles. The procession was composed of men, bronzed, slope-shouldered, uncouth, and begrimed with dust. Their clothes fitted them illy, for the most part, and they had no ideas of marching. They merely plodded along, not seeming quite to understand, stolid, unconcerned, and in a certain sense dignified, a pace and a bearing emblematic of their lives. They smiled occasionally, and from time to time greeted friends in the crowd on the sidewalk. Such an assemblage of the spraddle-legged men of the middle class, whose hands were bent and shoulders stooped from delving and constructing, had never appeared to an Asbury Park summer crowd, and the latter was vaguely amused. The bona fide Asbury Parker is a man to whom a dollar, when held close to his eye, often shuts out any impression he may have had that other people possess rights. He is apt to consider that men and women, especially city men and women, were created to be mulcted by him. Mulcted means done in milks, their money taken from him. Hence the tan-colored, sun-beaten honesty in the faces of the members of the Junior Order of United American Mechanics is expected to have a very staggering effect upon them. The visitors were men who possessed principles. He was a troublemaker. A good troublemaker, I'm with him.
Did he lose his job after that?
Say again?
Did he lose his job after that?
Yeah, he got in a lot of trouble. I'm going to read the reaction to that. No, that's okay. Yeah. Almost a century later, Bruce Springsteen would write the music that fits this scene, the heavy, dragging beat of his song Factory. For Crane, as for Springsteen, if these working men are heroes, they're confused, very human heroes, plodding forward through what Springsteen would call the mansions of fear, the mansions of pain. Crane, who had spent the previous year writing Maggie, a Girl of the Streets, which was about a hooker, recognized that these guys weren't Rice's starving masses. Compared to the folks in the Bowery, they were well off. At the same time, they're distinctly not the summer crowd in their tennis trousers. Partly because he insisted on describing the scene in all its contradictory detail, the American Day March became known as the parade that made Stevie Crane famous. First off, he lost his job. Asbury's Daily Journal attacked Crane's reporting as slanderous, and the Tribune agreed his assignment at the resort town Stringer was to boost tourism, not make fun of it. Typical shore reports were full of who was dining with whom and which visitor had the fanciest horse and buggy. How dare the 21-year-old say that Asbury Park made nothing? It made people happy. To attack wealth and leisure was to attack the basis of the city's economy. It's as if you attacked the condominium. Oh, sorry, editorial. At the same time, Crane had managed to offend the working man. The Junior Order of United American Mechanics resented his description as an uncalled for and un-American criticism of their appearance and parading talents. If he thought calling them stolid and dignified made the artist and the worker allies, he had another thing coming. They were patriotic Americans, the mechanics declared, dedicated to restricting immigration, teaching the Holy Bible in public school, and protecting business from, quote, the depressing effect of foreign competition, unquote. But the reason the article made Stevie Crane famous was that it came out just as his boss, the Tribune's owner and editor, was running for vice president on the Republican ticket. A gleeful opposition jumped on the column as evidence that the owner candidate was an enemy of the working man. In the resulting scandal, the article was reprinted and discussed nationwide, and Crane, who was still a year away from self-publishing Maggie, had the beginning of the bad boy reputation he would ride to fame. I seem to have forgotten for the moment that my boss on the Tribune was running for vice president, he would write years later. You'd hardly think a little innocent chap like me could have stirred up such a row in American politics. It shows what innocence can do if it has the opportunity. Crane's piece is a complicated mix of criticism, provocation, satire, and admiration, but the element it does not show is innocence. He isn't innocent about Asbury Park's class distinctions, which he describes from a street-smart perspective, and there's nothing innocent about his choice of subject matter. Crane may not have known how big a stink he was going to make, but this is a calculated piece of, among other things, self-promotion. And let me, so yes, he got fired. And let me just end because I'm fond of it.
That I read your book.
What's that?
That was just proof that I read your book.
There you go. I brought some water here, yeah. You guys have been very patient. This won't take long, this next little bit. It's almost over, right? It didn't hardly hurt, did it? Well, a little maybe. So, I just want to end because I think Stephen Crane, as well as being a troublemaker, was a great writer. And part of his inspiration was Asbury Park, and it was a kind of bizarre inspiration because he was, as I say, against it, even as much as he was a supporter of it. I mean, he thought it was nonsense, and he thought it was beautiful and important. And I try to get to that at the end of this chapter. Crane's definitive take on Asbury is an 1893 story about a summer romance on the shore, The Pace of Youth. It takes place mostly at Stimson's mammoth merry-go-round. Stimson is a man of granite will who believes he reduces those who oppose him to quick and abject submission. Is he a stand-in for the founding father, James Bradley? No more than the merry-go-round stands for Asbury Park. Stimson makes his living by selling wholesome fun, the controlled pleasure of riding the wooden horses and stretching for the brass ring. None of this allows for any real passion. So when his daughter starts to fall for one of his employees, Stimson orders it to stop. Otherwise, the boy is fired. Crane has the two continuing to exchange glances around the cashier's sign that hangs in their way. Finally, they arrange to take a walk along the shore. This is Crane. The electric lights on the beach made a broad band of tremoring light, extending parallel to the sea, and upon the wide walk there slowly paraded a great crowd, intermingling, intertwining, sometimes colliding. Despite all the censor's attempts to stop it, the crowd pushes the lovers closer and closer until they make contact. It's then that the paper lanterns out on Wesley Lake, flashing, fleeting, and careening, sang to them, sang a chorus of red and violet and green and gold, a song of mystic bands of the future. Call that chorus what you will, the American dream or just an enormous hunger. It was the great possibility that Crane felt rising out of Asbury Park. If it sounds like something Springsteen would write one day, both men were, after all, looking at the same city. And beneath Asbury's honky-tonk promise of getting away, of having fun, Crane saw a real dream of freedom. Once the crowd pushes them together and they touch, Crane's lovers realize they have to get out from under. They jump into a horse and buggy and start driving. At the climax of the story, when Stimson sees he's not going to be able to catch them, the owner is struck by, quote, the power of their young blood, the power to fly strongly into the future and feel and hope again. But Crane's story doesn't end there. As a student of Jacob Riis, Crane knew there was no escaping the system. The elementary sanity would try to control you wherever you went. So at the end of his story, as the lovers raced down the highway, the dusty beach road vanished far away in a point with a suggestion of intolerable length. As if that flashing, fleeting, careening song was somehow always in the future. As if being born to run was both a blessing and a curse. As if Asbury Park were forever.
Well, that'll wrap it up. Thank you to all of our readers. Thank you to all you guys, Kay, Susan, everybody from the Asbury Park Historical Society. On behalf of all of us, thanks for coming out to this very special event at a very special place.
And a special thanks to all the participants tonight. Yes. They were excellent, and thank you so much.
Yes. Well, I think this event really shows the Crane House at its best. A piece of living history, a bridge through the centuries, and a real community resource.
And unfortunately, we're not allowed to take down walls for open concept. I don't know how many people watch HGTV, everything, because we have to maintain the historic image and structure of it, so thank you.
Thank you.